Hey friends, it's Charles, and this is another edition of A Second Look, where I go back and I reread and maybe even re-review a book that I've touched on previously on this YouTube channel. Today we're going back to 2020 to AWA UPSHOT Comics with Grendel, Kentucky. I remember when this first came out. My guy that I was buying books from at the time, he always, if something came in that was my taste or my speed, he would have it pulled and ready to show me. And I dug this from my first look at the cover. They do a lot of great things here, and the story is deeper than I even picked up on the first reading. So I'm excited to talk about Grendel to Kentucky. Um, it's a story about this family who have an empire built on the illegal trade of marijuana back in 1971. And these guys, they're like outlaw royalty. Um, the adopted daughter is kind of the prodigal son. She's the head of a female motorcycle gang, and her name is Marnie. And Benny is the good son to stay at home to look after the family business. And he's the third generation. His father is the one who is in charge of the operation, and they have their pappy, who was the one that really first got things going in that community. And I love the way it tells, a short story. It reads fast, but they give you a lot of information, and the art does a lot of the heavy lifting. It is drawn in an almost photorealistic style with details that are engaging and immersive. When you look at the motorcycles, it's not a generic two-wheel vehicle. They put effort into, you know, everything, every detail, every gasket, every button on every jacket. And what this does is, like I said, it really brings you into the world. And when that style slightly changes, it's a storytelling technique. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but one thing I noticed is when the biker gang is recovering from, a big party the night before, this room is trashed, and there's certain things like this bear statue in the background that is kind of drawn wobbly, and you almost feel like you're in a drunken state yourself when you're looking at this panel. And then as they start to wake up to take care of that day's business, the art style goes back to that very photorealistic style. And I do believe, maybe, like I said, I might be reading too much into it, but I think it was an artistic choice. Um, Maybe it was a happy accident. I'm not a professional. Um, so let's get to the story here. And it goes back, a couple of, decades beforehand. Um, when the father, the town, Grendel, Kentucky, was had an economy based around the mine. And as we know, those natural resources do dry up, and they become more treacherous to attain. And the patriarch of the family suffered a collapse. And after the collapse, he was the only survivor. And when he came out, he started this wheat enterprise. And a town that was once barren, as far as agriculture goes, became like a wellspring of, garden and growth and life. And, you find out that there was more to the cave in than just guys perishing from falling rocks. Spoilers, of course, this is an old story, but what had happened was after the cave in, there were a lot of survivors. He was actually the worst off with his arm pinned under a rock. But he stayed quiet and still and witnessed his co-workers being consumed by a monster, a literal monster. And he noticed that, when he finally came to, he found a way out of the tunnel, out of the mine. And he noticed that over the next few weeks, everything became lush. Everything became vibrant. And he put two and two together and realized that this monster controlled it somehow. And that as long as the monster was fed, his community would be fed. And so he, in a way, convinced himself that it was not only not immoral, but his responsibility to sacrifice people to the mine and the monster therein in order to maintain this new life in the community. And he justified it by saying that, he brought in drifters and people that nobody would miss. And you come to find out, that's something that he passed on to his son. And his son is actually the first character you meet in the story, and the character who brings everybody back together. You see him preparing to go to battle outside this mine, and you cut to, the sheriff giving news of his passing and a bear attack, which brings Marnie, the prodigal daughter, back to town with her motorcycle gang. And she reconnects with Denny, her adopted brother, and they know that it's not a bear attack. Everybody knows it's not a bear attack. And so they want to get into the mine and find out what's really going on in that mine and what really killed their father. And they know that their grandfather is holding back information from them about what was really going on. And so, that right there in itself is filled with, moral decisions and processes and, for the greater good. And another overarching point that I'll get to by the end of the video that really stuck out to me upon the second reading of this. But, yeah, Marnie and her motorcycle gang, they make it their mission to take care of this thing that killed their father. And from there, it becomes really a run-of-the-mill monster slasher story. From, I'd say, the second half of the first book until the second half of book number 3. And you have characters encountering this monster. And one thing I like about it is that they approach the monster in different ways. A lot of these type of books, they have the monster as something in the shadows and ominous and unseen until the climactic moment. And while the monster is lurking in the background, he is ever present. And you actually see him not only in the first book, but in the cover here. If you look at the detail, you have Denny, you have the patriarch, you have Marnie, and if you look in the mine, we have the monster. That's something I didn't even pick up on. And about the art, they do some cool things like, every cover is meant to be like a movie poster from the 70s. And so that's another way that it takes you into this world. It really brings you into the storytelling. As well as the action pieces. They feel violent, they feel gritty, they feel disturbing. And even something as simple as a scene of Marnie and her motorcycles rolling into town, even though you're just reading it, the art makes it jump off the page to the point to where you hear the motorcycles in your head thundering down the street. And that, 1%er motorcycle style of that formation in the way that they roll into a town and take it over with something that you've seen before. You know that it is, all those motorcycles is a heavy experience that, is not only loud, but it physically shakes you. Just from the rumbling of all those motorcycles information. And they capture that with the art and the great detail that they bring. And the art style, like I said, is brutal. It's it's appropriate to the period that it takes place in, and there's nothing out of place. It's all period vehicles, wares, the you know good stuff there, and then in the writing, they pay attention to the social dynamic and hierarchy of a 1% motorcycle gang, outlaw motorcycle gang, and the way they do business, as well as I'm touching on the um, culture of a small town and the way that they handle business on their own and the secrets therein and the unspoken secrets that everybody knows about that aren't so secret. And so this captures a community and really makes the community its own character. The biker gang, while their individual characters get fleshed out, that organism as it is a living character in itself as well. And as the story progresses, you find out that things, are not only what they've seen, but in the third book, you find out that what happened in that first panel and what their father was trying to do was put an end to this deal with the devil, per se. And he was killed by the monster trying to put an end to having to give up, those sacrifices, because that's not a burden that he wanted to pass on to Marnie and Denny. He still hadn't told them, and it was a point of contention between him and his father. And yeah, great action, great story. You find out that the reason why even the father adopted Marnie and Denny was because while he said he sacrificed people that nobody cared about, he did leave a couple of loose ends with people that had kids being sacrificed to the monster in the mine. And those kids being Denny and Marnie. And so as a way of penance, he took them in unofficially, but officially into the family. But the thing that I mentioned earlier about the overarching story is really about, the danger of depending on, one source of income that is finite in a community, finite in a community, and what, the draining of these natural sources can do. When they were really pumping the material out of the mine, the land was in disrepair and damage, and there was no life. And it took the sacrifice of human lives in order to sustain the life that the mine provided. And it was about the cost of the mining industry in a roundabout way. And whereas, the cost of lives in a lot of mining communities may be hypothetical, in Grendel, Kentucky, it is very literal. People sacrificing human beings to the mine to make a profit. A great book. This is one of AWA UPSHOT's first books, and I highly recommend it. I'm sure you can find it in trade paperback. And if you can find it on Previews World, I always suggest you go to Coffee and Comic. They have great deals, great shipping nationwide. And when you use code OLDNERDWY, you get 15% off your order. So this has been Charles at Old Nerdwys Wyoming, talking about Grendel, Kentucky, 2020, AWA UPSHOT. Get it if you can. And I'll see you next time. Until then, keep reading them books. This has been a second look.